Yo, Julius, this is your girl Raven Chapman, the Omen. Just want to give you a big shout out here from the UK. And Ring IQ, you're the man. Thanks so much for your support.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Talk to me about yourself. What's going on with Ebony Bridges at the moment?
Yeah, not much. Just training and waiting for a date.
Potential fight with Shannon O'Connell. Your thoughts on that one?
I'm not really sure what's going on with that. I have to talk to Eddie and my manager about that one. Yeah. As far as I know, I got a voluntary defense next, and she's a mandatory, so I'm going to have to fight her at one point. But I'm not sure if it's next or not.
Would you look back for Shannon Courtney? Is that a fight you'd be interested in?
Yeah, of course. I would love to get her now and beat her properly.
And Rachel Ball just had a baby. She's coming back. Is that a possible fight for you as well?
I mean, you got to ask Rachel that. She's just had a baby. I mean, no possible fights. I'll fight anyone, but my main focus is getting the belts. You haven't mentioned any of the champions. So, yeah, my main focus is getting the belts and becoming unified.
Curious soundbites from newly crowned IBF bantamweight champion Ebony Bridges, who, as far as she knows, is still on track to be facing a voluntary challenger as opposed to a mandatory. A mandatory in her countrywoman, Shotgun Shannon O'Connell, her domestic rival, who never has any shortage of nice things to say about the blonde bomber. Interesting particulars are circulating out there in the boxing cosmos in reference to what's going on and where are we with this fight, where Ebony Bridges doesn't really know what's happening with that, and she still expects to face a voluntary in her next fight. A tweet by way of International Boxing News states
said an offer's already been made to Shotgun Shannon O'Connell, and she turned it down.
There really is only a few ways you can reconcile Ebony Bridges' recent comments on this potential matchup and what information is being put out there. That Shotgun Shannon O'Connell was already made an offer to face Ebony Bridges in September, late September, in Nottingham, over there in the United Kingdom, and she has so rejected it. Purse bids are due to happen in September should No Limit Boxing outbid Matchroom. They plan to stage the fight in Australia.
We've been talking a lot about bad optics lately. Situations that just don't look good based on how they're being handled.
It doesn't really look good that Ebony Bridges, when asked about the Shannon O'Connell fight, stated that she's still on track to defend her title against the handpick, against the voluntary challenger as opposed to a mandatory. The order from the IBF has come down. Everybody's aware of it, and everybody's aware that there's no way Ebony Bridges fights a voluntary and keeps the blue belt, keeps the IBF title, unifying with another champion at the weight. That's not an option now either. Once an order comes down from the IBF,
that's it.
You can't fight anybody else, and I think trying to would require the cooperation of Shannon O'Connell herself. And last I checked, Shannon wants that Ebony Bridges fight. She wants to get her in the ring. I don't think she's willing to step aside.
So it's somewhat bad optics that we're not really getting a straight answer from the Matchroom side of things when it comes to this.
Because we should be. It's a fairly simple run-of-the-mill situation. How much money is it going to take to get Shotgun Shannon O'Connell to fly over to Nottingham?
To fight Ebony in the United Kingdom.
Her new home over there in the United Kingdom. How much money is it really going to take? Are you really going to gamble the fight potentially going down in Australia as part of a no-limit promotion show when you're Matchroom?
You do shows anywhere from the UK to Uzbekistan to Milan to Spain to America.
In Mexico, you're going to let some Aussie outfit outbid you for one of your fighters, one of your champions. That's bad optics as well, if that's how the cookie crumbles, though it's too soon to tell. Too soon to know how this is all going to break down. And if this story checks out, it appears that the Shotgun Shannon O'Connell people, No Limit Promotions, who promote Shotgun Shannon O'Connell's fights in Australia, they're
playing hardball. They're either going to get Matchroom to give Shannon O'Connell more money,
enough money that she's willing to travel to the UK and box Ebony Bridges as part of a Matchroom show instead of a No Limit Promotion show. They're either going to have to give Shannon more money to where she accepts the offer, or this is going to a purse bid. They want to drag this out.
Can No Limit Promotions actually beat Matchroom in a purse bid situation?
You never know. There's always room for surprises. It all depends on what the fight is worth to Matchroom and what they are willing to pay in order to keep it. I think a lot of people were surprised when the people over there at Queensbury outbid Matchroom for the Tyson Fury versus Dillian Veit fight. And that situation, though, that was a considerably bigger, much bigger fight than this fight is. Better still, it all depends on what Matchroom is willing to pay to keep the show.
The rights to it.
If Matchroom values the fight at a certain price, and they stick to that price, well, there is wiggle room for No Limit to outbid them, because maybe to No Limit, the fight is worth much more in the domestic Aussie boxing scene as opposed to the one in the UK.
Where Matchroom might have looked at this fight as a good undercard fight, the No Limit people might look at it as a main event.
And if they look at the fight as being main event worthy, they may be willing to put up more money to get the rights to the fight so that it happens in Australia as a main event as opposed to the UK as an undercard fight.
And if that were to happen, not saying that it will or it won't so much as that if it did, that'd be bad optics for Matchroom.
You let the Aussies, you let No Limit Promotions beat you out for the rights to this fight. If you can't get it done, if you can't strike a deal before that deadline rolls around and it goes to a purse bid and you get beat out by No Limit, that means you didn't value this fight. You didn't value your fighter, at least not enough, to keep your fighter on your side of things. Matchroom is a bigger outfit with more resources than No Limit Promotions. That goes without saying. There's only a few ways a domestic outfit like a No Limit Promotions could beat out a global outfit like Matchroom for the rights to a fight. Almost immediately comes to mind is if that were to happen, Matchroom must not have been trying hard enough.
Because they have the means and they have the money, but I guess if that were to happen, they just didn't value the fight as much as No Limit did.
We are getting ahead of ourselves. The purse bid is set to be held several weeks from now. There's plenty of time in between now and then to strike a deal, to make Shannon O'Connell an improved offer to bring her over to Ebony's side of things so that Ebony will have home field advantage, so to speak.
Yeah, no, because they're both Australian, but Ebony's based out of the UK.
I just remember back in the day coming up when I was a young pro, like it was a lot of like black fighters that wasn't given the opportunity because we were told we weren't marketable, that we didn't sell. And even Floyd had to deal with that young in his career. But now, you know, you get the blue-eyed blind cat who's never fought a day in his life. And I'm not hating. I'm just looking at what we came up through as fighters. And that's what these athletes or fans seem to think. Like, they look at old basketball players and they're like, man, Charles Barkley, these guys are hated. No, they just speaking facts. And I remember fighting, making $1,000 for 4 rounds, $1,500 for 8, you know, no, $1,500 for 6, $2,500 for 8, and I'm happy, but I'm happy for the real guys that's fighting.
That soundbite from former champion, now retired fighter Ishe Smith comes to us by way of the Boxing Voice, detailing his feelings towards the novelty act that is Jake Paul, and what boxing has become. And it's not hard to see, not hard to understand why a true pugilist, a true prize fighter, who had to climb up those ranks and fight after fight, 4-rounder, 6-rounder, 8-rounder, 10-rounder, to subsequently 12 rounds for a championship boxing match, it's not hard to understand why fighters who have sacrificed so much
So that they could get to the point where they start making real money.
it's not hard to understand why a novelty act like a Jake Paul might elicit an adverse emotional response. These are not spectators in a spectator sport we're talking about. Ishe Smith was an actual prize fighter, an actual pugilist. And I do think that it's an emotional response we're seeing elicited here because he can't hide the resentment that he harbors towards Jake Paul. What Jake Paul is to boxing is what the Harlem Globetrotters are to the NBA.
It's not a real game. It's a novelty act. And what Jake Paul has been doing, that's not real boxing.
He's not fighting real boxers. So until he does, all he really is a novelty act. And I can take that at face value.
Regardless of why he hasn't faced a real boxer yet, a real pugilist, that's besides the point because he still hasn't fought one.
And if he really wanted to, don't tell me he couldn't find some 4-0, 5-0, 6-0 cruiserweight aside from Tommy Fury. Don't tell me he couldn't find anyone to fight aside from Hasim Rahman Jr. campaigning as a cruiserweight. Don't tell me he couldn't find anybody to fight. He could find someone.
If his goal really were to be taken seriously as a prize fighter, seriously as a pugilist, we wouldn't need to see this dog and pony show.
The circus that all of this has become, it's not actually necessary. If you wanted to get in there and make your bones as a professional, there are ample unbeaten cruiserweights to go around. That's not Jake Paul's intention. That much is obvious to me. I can look at the situation in its entirety with an objective lens because I'm indifferent. I'm not emotionally invested. Whereas Ishe Smith he is.
Of course he is. Having sacrificed so much for the sport, you think he's not?
He's not the only one either. He's not the only pugilist, actual prize fighter, that really doesn't like what Jake Paul is doing, even though, what's Jake Paul actually doing?
What?
You know, he's not taking food off the plate of actual pugilists and actual prize fighters, because I can't stress this enough, he came into the sport with a following, you understand, where an actual boxer,
A real one.
an actual prize fighter, hopes to amass a following throughout their career. Jake Paul started his career with a following that followed him over from all of his social media exploits, whatever they were.
The people that buy his fights and are interested in what he's doing, it's not guys like me or you.
His core supporters, his core fan base is not your traditional boxing fan that wants to take in a traditional boxing match. The people that keep up with this kid the most are other kids that followed him from other social media platforms. Kids who were already familiar with Jake Paul. Thus, his road to the sport is going to be different than an actual boxer or an actual pugilist, because he started out with a following.
The average boxer aspires to amass a following over time throughout their career, whereas Jake, he started out his career with a following.
So, he started out making more money than your average boxer. 7-figure paydays for what are novelty fights. What is a novelty act? Now, for me, that's no cause for resentment. I take it at face value. I just take it for what it is. Whereas someone who's more emotionally invested, someone who's actually sacrificed, they're still not going to like this.
Well, they are going to be a tad bit emotionally compromised. Emotions are going to have something to do with their overall view of what's going on here.
Well, the only thing going on here is Jake Paul is catering to the audience that he already had before he endeavored to become a boxer of any kind, novelty act or otherwise. He already had that following.
That's the truth.
It was Ishe Smith's contention that there are forces out there that would love to see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Caucasian champion make it in the sport of boxing. They're in such a hurry to see this that they're willing to crown Jake Paul.
You know, because the WBC was willing to give him a rank if he beat Hasim Rahman.
I said it before, I'm saying it again here and now. There is no search for the great white hope in boxing today.
This ain't the Larry Holmes and Jerry Cooney era.
There is adequate representation for most any boxing fan from any walk of life, any race or ethnicity, including white folks, including Caucasians. You know, they might really like Tyson Fury or some of those Eastern European fighters from the Far East.
Might really like Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk, and why wouldn't they? Those are two of the best guys in the sport right now.
Essentially what I'm getting at is you don't need to elevate Jake Paul to this position because you're so desperate to see a Caucasian fighter that's doing good in the sport of boxing when there are actual fighters.
You know, there are white fighters out there that can box. They don't need to unofficially crown Jake Paul to fill a void.
That really isn't what's going on, and I can't help but think that Ishe and some other fighters are emotionally compromised because they're annoyed with Jake Paul, his presence.
I really can't blame them for being annoyed, though. If we're going to call a spade,
if we're going to call it down the middle, and we're going to call it what it is, Jake Paul, his following is not comprised of actual boxing fans. Actual boxing fans, they don't view him as an actual boxer.
he's a novelty act until further notice. No more, no less.
Finally, in men's welterweight news, unbeaten up-and-comer Benn issued out a statement to former unified champion Keith Thurman stating, "You may as well retire."
How the mighty have fallen.
Top welterweight contender Conor the Destroyer Benn, 21-0 with 14 KOs, has become one of the young fighters seen as a star with a bright future in the division. Like many young fighters coming up, his hunger to fight a big name grows daily. Benn had been hoping to get a fight with former unified champion Keith one-time Thurman, and out of frustration, he called for one time to retire. It's no secret that Benn has been chasing the former unified champion. He has been trying to corner one time and engaging with him by calling him out on social media.
Very recently, Keith Thurman stated that he's no gatekeeper, but there's really only one way to prove that.
It's by smacking these young unbeaten whippersnappers around and taking their unbeaten records, taking their O's. Thurman claimed two-division champion Danny Garcia couldn't pass the Keith Thurman test after being called out, and Benn quickly interjected,
proclaiming that Keith Thurman wouldn't pass the Conor Benn test.
Benn is ranked in the top 5 by all 4 major sanctioning bodies. He can generate revenue as fans pack arenas to see him fight. The fact that the Destroyer can bring in a sizable payday is something he finds puzzling as to why Thurman is not too keen on making the fight. During a social media Q&A with fans, Benn expressed disappointment and suggested that Thurman should retire.
Well, yeah, he might as well.
He's not going to fight the likes of an Montes Stanionis, a Jaron Boots Ennis, or a Conor Benn for that matter. He's biding his time, holding out hope that he can fall face first into a big fight if he waits long enough.
He even felt comfortable enough to call out Jake Paul.
Think about the fights that Keith Thurman is actually expressing enthusiasm towards. A rematch with Danny Garcia that the fight fans aren't asking for, the fight fans don't want it, and more recently, he was seen calling out Jake Paul, throwing his name
into the hat of that novelty act.
Thurman, you may as well retire. He said he ain't fighting no crop coming through, but yet he wants the big names. I mean, listen, I'm probably one of the biggest names in the welterweight division, definitely for an earner anyway, so the fact that he don't want to take the fight surprises me a little bit. We know that some weeks ago, there were preliminary conversations for a Conor Benn versus Keith Thurman fight, and to no one's surprise, those talks didn't materialize into anything. Keith Thurman isn't about to cross over to anybody's side of the street across anybody's ocean.
I agree with Conor. Keith Thurman may as well retire.
Keith ain't got nothing going on right now, you understand. That's why he's willing to entertain a Danny Garcia rematch or a Jake Paul joke fight, a novelty fight. He's willing to entertain fights like that, and what that indicates is he really doesn't have much going on right now, but when a serious competitor, an unbeaten up-and-comer that shows he has somewhat of a ceiling in Conor Benn, when he calls him out...
Oh, Keith ain't got no time for a Conor Benn. He's got time for Jake Paul, though.
We talk about it all the time here on the channel in passing, just how many fights Keith Thurman is not likely to participate in with how many fighters. And when you take a step back and you look at the whole picture, you get the sense that, yeah, maybe Keith Thurman should call it a career because there are more fights that he's not willing to have.
He's not going to fight Stanionis. He's not going to fight Jaron Boots Ennis. He's not going to fight Virgil Ortiz. He doesn't seem to want to fight Conor Benn.
Just achieved the #1 spot by way of the WBC, and most people are interpreting that as a plan B. Should things not work out between Terrence and Errol, they'll muster up Keith Thurman as a stand-in for Errol instead. Though in truth, nobody wants that to be the case. Nobody wants that to be the scenario. We want to see the Crawford versus Spence fight.
Beating Mario Barrios after 2 years of inactivity shouldn't fast-track you to an alphabet title, let alone 3.
I'm just going to call a spade a spade. It's not like Keith Thurman is so accomplished that he's earned the right to take his foot off the gas. This is a guy with a grand total of 4 years of inactivity, you understand. His claim to fame is beating Danny Garcia and beating Sean Porter. That's not a Hall of Fame resume.
So robust that he's earned the right to be selective. Give me a break.
I mean, maybe in Keith Thurman's own mind, he thinks he's earned the right to choose, earned the right to be this selective. But to the rest of the world, the rest of the boxing community, he really hasn't.
When Conor Benn says he might as well retire based on how many fighters he's not willing to fight, I have to agree.
He's not wrong, you know. Conor Benn has marquee value. He's worth some money over there in the United Kingdom. And if you tack on the name of a former unified champion like Keith Thurman, you can make a really big fight out of it.
But Keith won't do it, and everybody knows it.
What's the point in having this guy around? He's just taking up space.
You can dress it up however you like. He doesn't want to fight anybody.
Yeah, Conor's right. Might as well retire.